Welcome to Demo Roundups. This week we have with us Alex from Noble 9 and our dear friend Rich Lafferty from here at PagerDuty. We're going to be talking about system weaknesses to improve resilience.
I am Chief Technology Officer at Noble 9. Noble 9 is a reliability management platform focused on service level objectives as a primary building block for that. And we're basically we've been trying to build the best reliability management software we can since 2019. We'll give you a glimpse of Noble 9 today, in addition to talking about our integration with PagerDuty. Incidentally, we're also a customer of PagerDuty. We're an avid user of PagerDuty in our own operations. And also more recently, PagerDuty is also a user of Noble 9, right?
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, hi, my name is Rich. I'm Principal Site Reliability Engineer here at PagerDuty. I've been with the company for a while now, coming up on 8 years, and located in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, Canada. And like Alex said, we're happy users of Noble 9. I am a big fan of SLOs. I think we're going to be probably talking quite a bit about SLOs and how to use SLOs on top of how to use Noble 9 and how to use PagerDuty today. Basically, kind of our background there is we started, we had SLOs in various places and to various levels of quality, and I think I would describe it as high variability, which is what happens when things kind of happen from bottom up. Some teams were more advanced than others. They were in a whole bunch of tools, including some tools that you wouldn't expect to see SLOs in necessarily, like business reporting tools and so forth. And so we kind of recognized that, like, fundamentally, I think, if you care about something, and PagerDuty cares about reliability a lot, because we know our customers, you folks, are counting on us being available when you're not. That you have to measure it. And there are a lot of things, people look at a bunch of sort of incident metrics, like, how many incidents did we have? How long was their impact? What was all the MTT things? We only have an hour, so I'm not going to go too deep into my thoughts about
It's
the
a whole
MTT
other show, man.
statistics.
Yeah.
That's a whole other show. That's a whole other show. But yeah, it really comes down to, well, if you want to know if your users are happy with your reliability, then what you want to do is you want to measure whether users are happy with your reliability. Even better if you can get leading metrics to know that they're going to be unhappy in the future. And that's really where doing SLOs right, especially powered by Noble 9, came in. And yeah, Alex.
Yeah, so one way to look at that is in the virtual world, in our world of hosting and operations, just like in the physical world, things tend to shake loose or rattle before they fail, right? Not all the time. Not all the time. You can have a catastrophic, completely unexpected failure. But often, had you been monitoring nominal behavior of a system, you can often get advance warning as a leading indicator that something has changed, whether it's like the traffic has changed, wow, this thing's using a lot more memory than it used to use, or this slightly slowed down over time, but repeatedly, our latency has fallen off. There are all these different kinds of leading indicators. And if you canvas your systems with measurement of those things, you very often can actually avoid a lot of incidents. But it's not just about that. It's also trying to measure the impact of incidents, right? So you can make better decisions about how you can make adjustments to improve your reliability. Where did you mentioned this thing, you mentioned this about having had a variety of SLOs and a variety of different, we didn't talk about that before. I'm kind of curious where.
We didn't, yeah. I mean, our metric system is Datadog. And there's an SLO feature in Datadog, and therefore a bunch of our teams naturally found their way to put SLOs in Datadog, and it was okay. Some other teams, our logging system is Sumo Logic, and some teams, rather than doing kind of, your typical Stats agent metrics, were pulling some of their metrics out of structured logs. which is great. And that meant that their SLOs were living in Streamline Logic. So now we got two places. And then there's this third case, which is sort of I'll call them the executive level SLO visibility, which was being generated by ETLing some data from other systems into Snowflake, and then displaying that with Periscope, which is now known as Sisense. I still call it Periscope because you get into habits. And the challenge with the executive SLO dashboards is that they're not used as operational data at that point. It's the kind of thing that you look at, how did we do last month? Rather than being able to go, hey, if we don't do something today, this is like the leading indicator thing for SLOs is just like being able to know that your users are happy to have a particular level, like barely happy, right? You want to set SLOs to barely happy. They're barely happy if, let's say, one of our key user journeys is an event comes in one side of PagerDuty and a notification comes out the other side. That's kind of like the most basic functionality we have. People want that to be quick enough.
Right.
And so, but what you want to know is that things are trending to the point where if you don't do anything, then users are going to be unhappy in an hour, in a day, in a week. And so looking at your SLOs once a month, is not going to get you that. It's going to find out that you made users unhappy a couple of weeks ago and you're only noticing now.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so really pushing that data down to a place where all of our teams could easily access it consistently in a tool that's really fundamentally meant for doing that. That was the one thing that I love about Noble 9. I mean, there's many things I love about Noble 9, but like from a philosophy point of view, it's like this is going to be the place where you monitor your service levels, not your CPU load, not your all that stuff is important to have, not your not your absolute error rate, but how close are we to the point at which users aren't going to be happy anymore? Has always been kind of the key thing from that.
Right. Okay. Yeah, also,
Yeah.
it's interesting to me that you have these multiple data sources: Datadog, Sumo Logic. No doubt, I believe AWS is primary hosting environment.
Yeah, we're on AWS, exactly.
Obviously, you have CloudWatch as well, and there might, I believe you're hosting in Kubernetes.
Yeah, so we've got all those Kubernetes metrics.
Platform, but
Yeah.
traditionally also hosted outside of Kubernetes. I mean, company's been around.
Of course, absolutely. Yeah, we have our share of legacy. We have our share of legacy stuff as well.
Prometheus or some other metrics kicking around there.
Yeah, no, exactly. A bunch of data sources. As much as possible, we try to get all the metrics kind of into Datadog, and then from there. But you're right that we do have a lot of potential sources.
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges that we've seen, SLOs were kind of not invented in normal enterprise companies. SLOs were innovated and developed in, let's say, unique and distinctive technology leading companies.
Yes,
that have
unique and distinctive technology leading companies. Sorry, my bad. Let's start with the G and with an E.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. But but not only they were very quickly adopted and innovated,
Yes.
Evolved in other companies that have, let's just say, not necessarily a normal infrastructure, not a normal monitoring or observability stack, right? If you want to do SLOs in a googly way, they're doing this inside of Google systems that we don't have with a mono repo that the rest of us in the first world do not have, right? So when we set out to provide SLOs that would work for more normal companies, and I think both PagerDuty and Noble 9 are versions of that company, are versions of normal companies, as are our customers, mutual or otherwise. They have usually a variety of data sources, like you said. They have processes that probably involve a lot of different commercial tools, sometimes homegrown tools. They probably have a more industry standard mechanism of doing things like incident management and operations. And maybe there's a bunch of different models, DevOps or traditional war room or whatever you have in operations, right? And so part of the challenge there is to bring that data together, or to go meet the data where it is, to be able to set some goal on it, to set some boundaries on it. And so, yeah, kind of hearing about your multiple data sources was really interesting. I would say Noble Nine's, when I talk to Noble Nine customers about the value of what they like about our version of SLOs, one of the things that they're consistently saying is, well, at least a third of the problem is just getting the data out of the data sources and getting it in a way that's consistent, that it's, fast enough to track it continuously, not in real time per se, but to track it continuously. That's a big part of the challenge. And yeah, come to think of it, PagerDuty also falls into that camp. But I mean, at the end of the day, all of that stuff is just plumbing, right? You're just plumbing metrics around. I think that there are observability teams where people solve that entire problem, however they solve it, central metrics platform or consolidation project. Maybe what's more interesting about the use of SLOs for operations is that you're able to set them, or you can aim to set them as close as possible to the user experience, right? Maybe I'll use a driving analogy. If I were to set an SLO on a car that's on a road trip, I wouldn't want to set the SLO on the oil temperature or even the forward movement of the car. If I could choose to set an SLO, I would try to measure, are the people in the car happy right now? Nobody immediately needs to take a pit stop, right? I'm thinking about taking a road trip with my kids, my family. But also maybe I would set an SLO on the ETA, because a car might be going fine, but if it's going in the wrong direction, or it's had to stop multiple times for some outside reason, it's still not meeting the goal of getting to the destination as quickly as possible, right? So there's kind of an art to setting SLOs as close to the user experience as possible.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And being able to look at, at a glance, to go, where are the spots that users aren't happy today? And where are the spots, really choose those kind of the critical user journeys and figure out how to measure those journeys. And it's always an approximation of user happiness, because you have to deal with the metrics that you have. But like, what are those, where aren't users happy today? That's kind of reactive. But again, that being able to tell where trends are heading in the wrong direction, and if you don't do something, then things are great. And one of the things that I love about Noble 9, we should take a look at Noble 9. One of the things I love about Noble 9 is that it makes it really easy to see where those things are going to come from. Should we do a little walkthrough?
Yeah, sure.
A bunch of people joined the demo roundup. They're all sitting there going like, okay, is there going to be a demo? Let's take a look through Noble 9.
A walkthrough of Noble 9. So Noble 9, as I mentioned, is based on SLOs. And before I show you, there's a bunch of little features in here we can click around, and what we have set up here is probably it's a small demo environment. So maybe this would be sort of one team's or one application's view of Noble 9. Noble 9 is set up to handle many thousands of applications at a time, but with role-based access control and adjustable views, you can also focus in on one application. And this is sort of looks like one application. The demo data in here, this is a demo application that is looking at an e-commerce use case, right? Which is, I think, is pretty accessible to most people. So we have things like putting things into your cart, emptying your cart, fetching your cart, checkout, some product catalog stuff, shipping, etc. And I'll just look at one of these SLOs so you understand the basic building block and what an SLO looks like inside a Noble 9. So you get that basic thing. And let's just use add to cart. Let's say I'm trying to set an SLO on a shopping cart or a shopping experience in a store, in an e-commerce storefront, where somebody clicks, put this in my cart. In Noble 9, an SLO is based on queries, one or more queries. This is a ratio SLO. For latency and for other use cases, we also have a threshold SLO. This one is a latency. This one is a ratio SLO that is basically running two queries. And it's basically just counting how many requests got a 200 status out of the total count of requests. So it's very simple, you know, a 200 response code on an API endpoint. By default, Noble 9 it's adjustable, but it's going to run that every minute. And this service level indicator chart is that data flowing in from the data source. And you can see we have a bunch of data coming in on that SLI. This is sort of a heartbeat of that SLI. But you can also see there's a spot here where we lost some reliability. We went from 100% reliability down to 99.99 and change. And if I zoom into that, we can look at what actually happened there. And I think if you're not familiar with SLOs, or if you're not familiar with Noble 9 SLOs, you'll see at a high level how this works. Yeah, so basically what happened here was we were humming along. Interestingly, there was a period of no requests recorded, which may have been due to maybe a restart or relocation in our hosting environment. And then you can see there was a period here where we had maybe a few minutes of a higher count of total requests than good requests, meaning we were sending responses other than 200s during this time. It was brief. Maybe it was a passing cloud in the hosting environment. We didn't burn our whole air budget. We just went down, you know, a tiny amount on our overall achieved reliability. But you can see that we recorded that. And probably if you tried to add to your cart and you got an error message, the app might retry, or it's possible that the person would just, you know, it's the internet, right? They would just try it again and refresh it again. And we would recover from that. So we've set the error budget, we've set the target on this at 3 nines, which gives us basically 0.1% of those requests can fail before we will have exhausted our error budget, basically. We're giving ourselves an allowance for this error. And again, you can see in those moments, we have a burn rate, which is sort of the rate at which we're consuming the error budget. Instantaneously at 6:48, incidentally, we were burning through our error budget at 943 times what would have been in a sustainable rate. So that was a very brief outage, basically, a very brief disaster. If that persisted for several minutes, we would have, in fact, exhausted our error budget. And this gives us some metrics that we can alert on and that we can monitor and report on. So, you know, first of all, I could report on how much reliability I achieved or how much error budget I have remaining. I could alert or report on the burn rate. And what we're able to do with this is if you have metrics in, let's say, in a wide variety of data sources, as well as custom data sources, because you can send custom data into Noble 9, then we can probably set an SLO on it. And that SLO becomes a sort of universal goal setting adapter between the metrics and the goal you're trying to achieve. And I can use that as a building block in a lot of different ways. You know, here's one with, yep.
I want to jump in there for a second to talk about error budgets. You know, obviously we don't have time to do your kind of an SLO 101 here. Noble 9 had some great intro to SLO documentation on their website. But the thing about error budgets, this is like the powerful thing. If there's one thing about SLOs you need to understand what's going on here, is that the error budget is that you are allowed to have a certain level, an acceptable level of unreliability in your service. You're not going to run at 100%. You're going to have some incidents. You're going to have some, well, it wasn't an incident, but things declined a little bit and then they came back and then we noticed the next day. You're going to have times when that happens. And being able to define internally your acceptable level of unreliability is really a huge power, because you're going into this at peacetime. When you're not in the middle of an incident, you're going to agree with your product owners, with your sales team, with your support, with your customer representatives, that this is the level that's accepted. In this case, this example service is targeting 99.9%. Which is a reasonable amount. I always have to look up the nines to minutes thing. I don't have it off the top of my head. But the trick is negotiating that in advance. That we think users are going to be happy if we're available 99.9 or 99.95 or even 99.99% of the time means that you're not saying you're going to be reliable 100% of the time, which you will not be able to achieve. There's always going to be something or the potential for something. And the trick is, if you don't have an SLO, if you haven't agreed in advance that your acceptable level of unreliability is some value, then the implicit SLO ends up being 100%. If you don't
Right.
promise a particular level of reliability, everyone's going to assume that you're 100% reliable, which is not feasible to meet. I'm going to pass it back to us. So I just want to make sure for folks that hadn't experienced error budgets before, just the power of these things is huge.
It also works. So I can set this goal, and you're right. Sometimes this is in communication, negotiation, sometimes with a product team, sometimes with customer facing team, sometimes with the customer directly. Sometimes we even set SLOs that map to an SLA that has legal or financial surveillance, right? We may try to measure that as directly as we can. But in order to use an SLO, I don't need to know where that line was set. I don't need to know where the target was set. I don't need to know if it's, let's say, if it's a latency SLO. Maybe I have one of these that is a latency SLO, and you could see that with a latency SLO, I'm going to get a time series of latencies, 200 some milliseconds. And I have this line here at 240, which is my goal. I have a threshold set. In order to use an SLO, as an observer of the SLO, as a consumer of the SLO, I don't need to know what your latencies are, where you set your threshold, even where you set your target. I can just know, is it green, is it yellow, is it red? Are you hitting your goal right now, or are you missing it? Okay. If I am a user who's, let's say I'm a developer on another team, and I'm having a trouble with today, product catalog, elevated latency on the get product API call, and I'm trying to use that service. I don't need to know what their normal latency is. I don't need to know what sort of goal they set. I know that they're in the yellow right now. I know that they must be dealing with some sort of a low-level outage right now. And so SLOs provide that kind of level of abstraction. That team can create an SLO. They can manage to it. It looks like this team was struggling quite a bit recently over the past 28 days or so. Looks like this is a 28-day rolling SLO. They recovered recently, but still they've recovered to the point where they could still be considered in the yellow. So this kind of gives me a cross-team view. And we could do that by error budget remaining, but also instantaneously by burn rate. And so you can see we can use these SLOs as a building block. This is at the service level in this case to show multiple SLOs within the service. And this kind of gives you a way of, basically the promise is this. If you take the time to set SLOs on your metrics, on your observability systems, and you canvas your application services and even infrastructure with those SLOs, you get a long-term tracking of how you've done it, how you've performed against those goals. And in fact, we keep this data not just for a normal retention period of 28 days, but you can scrub all the way back to a year or more. We typically keep the data for multiple years, 2 years by default in Noble 9, but some people keep it longer. So it gives me a long-term diary of how did I actually do in my, in my operations? What was my actual performance as it went down? And so that, that becomes a really powerful thing, not just in planning and incident response, but it becomes a useful thing in portfolio management across all my systems to look at where I'm doing fine and where I might need to make some longer term investments to shore up a system or replace provider or application that's not working as well as it was intended to work. I also wanted to mention a couple of other. So one of them is often the type of data that setting those goals and targets, picking a target, or like I said earlier, if you have one that has a latency and you're trying to pick a threshold for where you set that latency, that can be challenging, especially for engineers who are either running a system they don't own, or they're developing a system, but they're not necessarily always paying attention to exactly what's happening in production. It can help to have some historical analysis of that data. And there's a couple of tools in Noble 9 that help with that. One of them is SLI Analyzer. I haven't previously created an SLI Analyzer, but I can maybe demonstrate what that looks like. And basically what you can do is take a query that you're considering, and I can enter the query in here. This one is a ratio metric. So I enter a good query and a total query. I can import the data historically for up to 30 days. And this will give me statistical information and historical analysis. I won't run it right now. It takes a couple minutes to fetch the data from the data source, and gives me a way of doing a what-if analysis of that SLI to see if it would make a good SLI to set an SLO on, and to help me gauge where to set my targets and thresholds. Like, what if I know I didn't have any incidents, what reliability would I have achieved? And then once I create that SLO, I can also run replay, which is a historical data import feature. So I can say, I want to create that SLO as if I had created it 30 days ago. And even though I just created it today, get enough history to really gauge how I performed over a trailing period, which is often long enough.
Let me interject on that one. One thing we found really powerful about the replay feature, it's really easy to think about it when an SLO is new. You want to, in the SLI analyzer, you've gone back in time, you've gone, this is actually measuring what we expect it to measure. Sometimes it's at the threshold rate, sometimes does the metric work at all? Because sometimes, especially one thing that we did at PagerDuty is we asked everyone to use ratio metrics or ratio SLOs for everything. And the reason we did that was we wanted all of our SLOs to be based on the count of events, really just to prevent people from getting stuck trying to figure out what to use, and so that things are comparable, and so that it's really easy. And we took that advice from Google's Art of SLO workshop, which it just makes it really easy to think about that a particular event, a request, a notification, an incident workflow, some kind of thing that someone wanted to do was either good or it was bad. And your SLs are all framed around, are they good or are they bad? And so sometimes it takes a little bit of playing around to go like, okay, so how exactly do I want to weight those metrics? Either just because of, good old user error. I said we use Datadog. Writing those Datadog queries can be a little challenging sometimes. Or because, a lot of times we'll do it and we'll look at it and we'll go, well, that's funny. Oh, and it turns out we're not collecting those metrics correctly or whatever. But the other great thing about the replay feature that I didn't expect, but it turns out is really, really useful, is that sometimes you want to change an SL. You want to just like, oh, you know what? We can improve that. We're going to implement a new metric that's specific to collect this SLO. And knowing that you can go back by your SLO window or further means you can just do that. And if you couldn't do that replay, then everyone's always afraid to touch things. It's like, oh, we're not going to have any data. We can't change that SLO. We could make it better, but we're not going to make it better, because if we do, then we're going to lose that whole, we're going to have to be starting over. We can't afford to start over. So knowing that you can always just kind of refill it back for one window, especially if you use rolling windows, you can go back on it. It makes it much easier for people to go, I'm going to make a tiny little improvement to this.
Yeah. It's also useful for cases where maybe the data that came in from the data source was wrong, or maybe, oops, I didn't filter that quite enough, and I aggregated some data that's not relevant. We've also seen it used in cases where you had a observability data outage or break. In fact, that happens to everybody, right? Even the biggest, most solid metric systems sometimes go down for even a day, right? We have to recognize that nothing's 100%, that even your observability pipeline has an error budget of its own, and we want ways to adapt to that and fill that gap, because ultimately what we're trying to do is to build that long-term record of what actually happened. You know, you don't want gaps in that record. You don't want errors in that record. Sometimes we also see people using replay to restate an SLO when they realize they need the data to look a certain way for the weekly review, for their monthly review, for their operational report. You don't want this crazy red thing on there that you have to explain to everyone over and over again was just a data break or was just a small mistake of some kind. You know, you want to be able to repair the report, and we're providing the capability to do that.
That said, one thing I said at the very beginning of this thing is how useful SLOs can be for actual day-to-day operations. And they're definitely also used for that reporting stuff. But once you have this data, I want to make sure I love how Noble 9 approaches alerting. And once you have this data, you actually need to get it in front of teams somehow. And this, of course, is also where Noble 9 and PagerDuty start working well together. But yeah, can we do a little bit of a dig in on the alerting side, and then we can start talking about how I can connect over to the PagerDuty side?
So Noble 9, you can think of Noble 9 alerting as it could be used as literally alerting, you know, including send the alert to PagerDuty and wake me up. But often alerting, it might be urgent, or it might be lower urgency alerting that you can treat as sort of like a notification. And we have a bunch of different alert methods. You'll see PagerDuty obviously prominently on here, but we also have a very powerful webhook that can reach other things, or even reach those supported versions if you need additional data with a very customized payload. The rules for alerting in Noble 9, we have a bunch of sort of preset rules, including things that you probably recognize from the literature if you're familiar with SLOs, things like fast burn, slow burn for long and short SLOs. Alert me if my budget's almost exhausted, etc. So there's a bunch of presets in here, and also a very customizable alert policy where you can do things like one specific average burn rate. You know, tell me when my system is on fire to this exact extent over time. And then those can be wired up to those alert methods. So we have a couple of them in here, a fast burn alert policy that is tied to PagerDuty with dynamic routing. We'll talk about that in a moment. And an average burn rate. And I added a kind of noisy average burn rate just to make sure we're getting some alerts so that we can demo it in here, specifically on empty cart latency SLO that we can show. So you can think of this as sort of like, look, we use so much automation. We have so many services that we run, that we monitor, that with this alerting, I can basically put a microphone on every component. And, you know, they say the squeaky wheel gets the grease. I can mic every single wheel, every single cog, and every single wheel of my architecture, and wire that up to an alerting system. And PagerDuty is ideal for a couple of reasons. One is if you're a PagerDuty customer, you're already using it for your operational response. Another one is it has sophisticated features for things like routing, urgency, and organization of those alerts once they're flowing out of the system. I think PagerDuty is first or second most popular alert routing.
First,
alert
obviously the first. Like there'd be no question.
They might also
Definitely
go to
the
chat,
first.
but we have customers that are sending alerts to chat via PagerDuty, specifically because of the routing and organization features inside of PagerDuty, right? So
yeah, that's exactly.
Let me show you the Noble 9 side of this, and I think maybe looking at that empty cart would be a good place to look at this, because I think there are some alerts that fired in there. Yeah, okay, so if I go to maybe the last hour here, we can see a couple of these alerts. We had, look at this, a really brief exceeding of the threshold here, where our threshold is 240 for this latency number, and we went up to 242 for a couple of requests, right? This alert fired. And you can see here that it says my average burn rate exceeded 1.1x, and this then would have alerted to PagerDuty just a few minutes ago, maybe half an hour ago. And this is an annotation inside of Noble 9. You can see Noble 9 has the capability to do automatic annotations for alerts. I can also add a manual annotation in here, and it's sort of part of the diary, part of that long-term record of what happened in the SLO. And this one right here is just telling me that it alerted to PagerDuty. Let's talk about where that went when it went in there. Do you want to swap screen
Yeah,
share?
let's switch it over. I will grab the share. One of the things, oh, I just missed my opportunity there. It's like, do you want to request sharing? There we go. One of the things that's interesting, of course, is I'm an engineer at PagerDuty, supporting the actual product. I'm not in our sales org or anything like that. And so I'm really on here as a PagerDuty user and a customer of Noble 9. And Noble 9 and PagerDuty are really nicely integrated, but we didn't sit down together and go, how should this work together? And that gives you an opportunity to kind of take the great stuff that's in Noble 9 and customize it for exactly what we need to do at PagerDuty. Now, I'm going to show you this in a demo PagerDuty account, but I copied this stuff over from how we're actually using Noble 9 as well. One of the challenges we had, so in Noble 9, kind of the way things work, if I had one slide, I would have made a slide like this. Instead, I'm going to hold my hands out. You have SLOs are connected to alert policies. And alert policies, which is, what we're looking at here, like fast burn. Here's an alert policy, which is saying, oh, I can come back here. Here we go. Right, this is going to alert on this condition. And the alert policy is then connected to an alert method, which is, for instance, send an event to PagerDuty. One challenge that and you can do that. You can just set up, when you go to add a new alert method, this is where I'm demoing someone else's software. Remind me where the alert methods are, Alex.
It's under integrations on the second tab.
It's under integrations, right. There we go. You have an alert method, and when you go to set up a new one of those for PagerDuty, you put in the integration key, exactly like you'd expect for anything you integrate into PagerDuty. You have a service, you set up a new events API integration, you put this in, and so forth. The challenge that we ran into is that we wanted to use the same alert policies across multiple teams, and all of our teams are on call for the same software. So different groups of engineers, different services in technical services in PagerDuty and so forth. And so one thing that we were able to do is we've got this dynamic routing policy here where we have a single integration key. I'm glad it doesn't show that right now. Where we have a single integration key. And so when you want stuff to start coming into PagerDuty, what we wanted to do is to be able to have a single alert method that multiple teams SLOs all used and came in. And the way that we did that is by using a feature that I love called event orchestration. Rather than have an alert method for every service that comes in, we were able to set up one with dynamic routing. And the way and what we ended up doing is we set up a dynamic route that says to look for a regular expression inside the payload that we get from Noble 9, which is the PD service ID. Now, one thing that Noble 9 has adopted everywhere is labels. You can apply labels to SLOs, you can apply labels to Noble 9 services, you can apply labels to alert policies and so forth. And so what we're able to do in Noble 9 is set up that on the SLO, I believe it was empty card. Let's see if we did this on.
Expand in front of empty cart.
That's what I'm looking for. Yes, is we have this label, which is a PD service ID, and then this slug. That corresponds with a service that I have in my demo account. If I go to the shopping cart service, you can see that's the service we're talking about. And that lets our SLO users, our Noble 9 users at PagerDuty, all they have to do is tag label at whatever level they want. They can label it at the SLO level. They can label it at the service level, where a service is a box that contains multiple SLOs. And then when it gets to PagerDuty, it will automatically route itself to the service that matches that service ID. All this, you only have to set this up once. The other thing is we Terraform everything. And so I love Noble9's presets. Unfortunately, the presets by name aren't exposed in Terraform, so we duplicated a whole bunch of those in our own Terraform modules. And all of this wires up without having to create an alert method per team, an alert method per service. It all just goes into PagerDuty.
That's great.
Well, while I'm in here in this, there's another little PagerDuty trick that I will show off. I mentioned, we didn't coordinate how this would work. And one challenge that I had with some of the events, I'm just going to find an open incident here, is that or not open, okay. By default, if I go down far enough here, no, okay, I'll do it this way. I'm going to look at the actual event that Noble9 sent us. Alert, view message. So this is what we actually got in on the wire. This payload section is what we actually got in on the wire from Noble9. And so the summary, as we got it on the wire, is the SLO empty cart latency is in project that needs attention. And it's true, it does need attention. But one piece of feedback we got from our users as we were rolling out SLOs is that sometimes that attention is immediate attention. And sometimes that attention is, oh, we're going to run out of error budget in a week and we don't need it right away. And so there's a couple things we did about that. The first thing that we did about that is that if I go back to our event orchestration, we put in a global orchestration rule to update the alert titles. And what that does, so for all events that come in, we are going to extract some variables. I look in that, did I leave that open? No, I can though. We look in that payload for the text following conditions followed by labels, and we capture the part in between, which is here, the following conditions, and then there's some text, and then there's labels. And so we capture that into a variable. And also we're going to take from that payload, the phrase SLO, which is here, SLO empty cart latency. And we're going to put that into a variable. Then we're going to use those to change the incident data to update the summary to say SLO alert, the name of the SLO, followed by that alert title, which means that instead of needs attention, you get a title that actually tells you average burn rate based on the alerting window of 5 minutes. And I mean, also, I gave our friends at Noble9 feedback that that'd be more useful, but I didn't have to wait for them to make some updates. I know you've made some changes since the first time we set this up. We were able to just go, well, we want this to look different. The data's in the body. We want to pull it up into the summary, and that's all there.
That's great. I love that you can customize it like that. Make it as meaningful as possible. So if I'm woken up at 3 a.m., I know exactly what to do about that.
Absolutely.
Great.
And even better, sometimes you'd want to not be woken up at 3 a.m. And I did not set this up. Well, maybe I did. No, we don't have this. We don't actually have this in an SLO. But sometimes when you alert, let me go to alert policies. Average burn rate. This is saying, okay, the average burn rate is high on the alerting window of 5 minutes. That's still relatively urgent, I think. But sometimes you might want to create an alert policy, which is like slow burn. Here's time windows for over a week, right? Which is going to give you an average burn rate on the alerting windows of 2 days. If I'm on call for this service, I really don't want to get woken up at 12 a.m. because our SLO is going to burn over a week. My reaction is going to be, that could have waited until the morning. And so the other PagerDuty feature that helps with that, especially with everything's going into the same integration key, is a feature we have called dynamic notifications. And the idea behind dynamic notifications is that it maps the alert severity with a handful kind of standard fields here. And that maps to urgency to either high or to low. So I don't have an example of this set up, but when you go into a service, when you're configuring your service in PagerDuty, you can you can choose dynamic notification based on alert severity. And when you do that, it shows you the mapping here. But it also lets you what happens with the low urgency alerts. what's going to happen is low urgency alerts. When you have your own alerting set up, your own notification rules, there are separate ones in here for high and low urgency. Now, this is a demo account, and of course, whenever I set up a demo account, it sends me a whole bunch of stuff to my phone, and I go, oh, no, 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 we can't have that. And so I set it only use email. But if you were doing this, you would have probably like, push notification to your phone and SMS and so forth in the high urgency. And maybe just email or email and Slack in the low urgency. So all you would need to do in Noble 9 is put some content in the alert that contains severity critical or severity low, and PagerDuty will dynamically assign you will use either your high or your low notification priority based on that. And so that gives you a whole bunch of power without having to have a whole lot of complicated, it lets you have your SLOs in Noble 9, your alerting logic over in PagerDuty. And it's some of those things that I find that, folks that have been using PagerDuty as their paging tool for a while maybe haven't tapped into as much. And so it really gives you a lot of customization in terms of how you want to handle alerts. We only have a few minutes left. There's one more thing I want to show, which is going back in the other direction. Do you want to demo quick, Alex, the annotations, and then I'll show how we have it set up?
Sure, yeah. Basically, one of the things that annotations can be really useful for is showing, I have this other SLO, get product latency, is showing, like I was saying, a diary of what happened on your SLO, okay? And often our customers will use these for things like releases, deployments, but also any kind of incident or any kind of research that was done about an incident. And in this case, we thought one of the things that might be relevant to a team that owns this service would be their PagerDuty incidents on the service, not originating from Noble 9, but from some other alert, or directly manually created incident that's paging someone. And so Rich configured PagerDuty to send a notification back to Noble 9 based on an incident that's created in PagerDuty, not by Noble 9. And that's using an incident workflow, right, Rich?
Yeah, one of the things, what made this like, oh, we need to show this, is that even though we're mutual customers of each other, there's no dedicated Noble 9 integration for annotations in PagerDuty, and that doesn't matter. What we did is we used our feature called incident workflows, and we set up 2 incident workflows. One to create an SLO annotation on a new incident, and another to update it on resolution. Now, annotations have either a point-in-time date or they have a start and an end. And so what we were able to do, even though we didn't have support, is just use the Noble 9 API. We've got a conditional trigger, which says when an incident is created on the web app service in this demo account, the important part here is we need to send a post request to the annotations API with a particular payload. And you'll see that both the start time and the end time are incident created at. These are all fields that come straight out of the PagerDuty integration with incident workflows. All of that data is just there. Now, as it turns out, Noble 9 has a bit more complicated authentication mechanism than just send it your API key. But we were able to do that as well. Initially, we have to hit this API access token, and we use some authentication headers, which I'm not able to see in here because it's over in the connection management. But we request an access token using static credentials. We use a lookup by key incident action to look up access token from the output of that previous post request. And then by the time we get down to sending this post request, we can access that and send it across in the authorization field. And then the second workflow that I set up is basically doing the same kind of thing. But when an incident resolves, we now have a resolution time. And so we do the same little auth dance. This is conditional. When status match is resolved on that service, we send a put request. And the put request lets us upsert the annotation. So we send it basically the same thing, except now we have a new end time. And so being able to set that all up means you can just have all of your PagerDuty instance on a service that affect an SLO shown as annotations with a start and an end time, and it's kind of gray, like gray in the middle, so you can see it over on that. And we didn't have to wait. And it's funny for me to say this. I didn't have to wait for PagerDuty to implement actions specific to Noble 9, even though I'm at PagerDuty. These webhook and JSON dictionary incident actions make it easy to support whatever API you need to support, even if there aren't dedicated actions for that in PagerDuty yet.
That's really cool, and it gives the service owners this additional context, right? No matter where it came from, it could be coming from some other system, complete other system, but PagerDuty routing that back to Noble 9 is really great context.
We're always here on the third Thursday, this station. Sign up for future ones. We've got a bunch of stuff coming up about AI and our agents and new things for schedules and services, which is always the stuff that folks are clamoring for, is changes there to meet their needs. So we're excited to show you what's new and exciting on those parts of the product. Thank everybody for coming along with us today. This has been great. Alex and Rich, thank you so much for this. As we've been going through talking about this for the last couple of weeks, I'm just like, man, we're going to be at this for like 2 hours. Like, this is going to be, there's so much here.
Absolutely.
We could do a whole day on just this stuff. We've barely scratched the surface on some potential for both the products in this space. So like, yeah, this has been great to have this intro and
having me on Demo Roundups. It was fun.
Yeah, awesome.
Loved it.
More integrations to come.
Yay, awesome. That's fantastic. Love it.
Right.
Yeah. All right, guys. We'll see you back next month. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.